people have made stupid comments. And, you know, it's funny, you can laugh at some of these, but what's important, and Kathy did most of the medical stories. There are 14 stories, 14 different topics, if you will. We each did 7, and she did some of the medical ones, which had enormous impact, caused deaths of people because the truth was not permitted to get in the way of the old procedures for doing things. Kathy knows one of my favorite people is Ignaz Semmelweis, who was at the lying-in hospital in Vienna, and she can tell you that story. He was quite a doctor back in 1840s or so, but he ran afoul of the scientific hierarchy and because of their not willing to go along with his findings, which were quite scientific and later validated, and there was even a stamp issued in his honor later on. But while he was living, that didn't do much good for the women who died because of the resistance to his ideas. And I'll just say one thing about that. What he found was that women were dying from childbed fever.
Well, she can tell the story. It's one of my questions that I have on here, except I totally can't pronounce his name. But no, it was a fascinating story. No, we're going to go there. Don't worry. Kathy, your turn.
Okay. Well, Ignaz Philipp Semmelweis, and it is difficult to say, was born in 1818 and died in 1865. He was from Pest in Hungary, and after high school, he went to Vienna to medical school and graduated, received his Doctor of Medicine degree, and ended up teaching medical students at the Vienna General Hospital. What he discovered when he arrived there was that childbed fever was rampant. For up to 2 weeks after a woman had given birth to her infant, she would develop a raging infection of the uterus or the genital tract, and it would become systemic within hours, and in most cases she died. At times, entire rows of women would die within days of each other, and their infants were also succumbing to this kind of infection. Because we didn't know about bacteria at the time, and later on in the 19th century, it was discovered that it was Streptococcus bacterium, but they didn't know it then. The reason that Semmelweis came to the conclusion that it was being passed to women from the hands of the medical students and from his own hands was because, it was quite by accident, one of his colleagues was working in the morgue dissecting one of these women when his finger was pricked by a scalpel. And within days, he developed all of the same symptoms of childbed fever, and he died. And Semmelweis was alarmed by this because it signaled to him that this contaminant was being passed from the cadavers that they were autopsying in the morning to the women that they were doing multiple examinations on in the afternoon as they were in labor and about to give birth to their babies. And so what he did is he introduced a method of hand washing using chlorinated lime water and asked all of his medical students to wash their hands before they examined women. And he did so himself. And he noticed a dramatic decrease in the number of deaths as a result of childbed fever. And he very carefully documented this over time. He even did laboratory experiments introducing this into rabbits and introducing other contaminants into rabbits to see their response. He carefully documented this. And what did it get him? Fired. He lost his job. His ideas were not accepted. His supervisor came from the zeitgeist of the old guard. He refused to believe that the hands of medical doctors and medical students that were there to heal were actually killing women. And throughout Europe, the doctors rejected Semmelweis's ideas, even though he presented them, and his colleagues who supported him presented them very scientifically. They clung to old theories about the cause of this, including things like emotional distress. The women were afraid, and they developed these diseases and died out of fear of giving birth. Or the milk metastasis theory, where supposedly the milk from the mammary glands traveled down into the uterus, and when they just dissected them, that white clotted substance, which was really pus, they thought was clotted milk. And there was also the miasma theory, where they thought that probably the putrid odors from swamps and other places were causing women to become ill and to die. So they refused to link their hands, which they did not wash after they did autopsies, that they just wiped on their bloody aprons before they examined all of these women. They refused to admit that they might possibly be responsible for this, and refused to take steps to correct the situation.
But remember, at that time, it was unusual to change the bedding in the hospital beds more than once a month. And there was a strange aspect of this, too. The women who were delivered by midwives, only 2% developed childbed fever. The women delivered by the doctors, it was 20%. And Semmelweis was successful at reducing the percentage for the deliveries by the medical students and the doctors down to the 2%. Now, that didn't look good for anybody. I mean, why should a midwife, of all people, have a much lower rate here, you see? So there's a sexism part of this story, too. But anyway, he was honored later with a postage stamp.
He got a postage.
Not only that, but a medical school was actually named after him, but it was after he died. It was years after he died.
I just find it hard to believe that they had never experienced pus in other medical areas, that they would recognize pus for pus. I mean, I know what pus looks like, and I'm not a medical doctor.
Look, when you're arrogant combined with ignorant and of an elevated status, reality doesn't much matter. Ego goes before everything else. Ego and arrogance. That's one of the major themes of the book, is that people were making pronouncements from on high without knowing what they were talking about. And they're still doing that sometimes, you might say. That's one of the reasons for writing the book. We need to be wary that new ideas aren't looked into because somebody on high says that's silly. And, there are 14 chapters each, and there's a lot of these unreasonable, in quotes, ideas. And they have consequences, the resistance to new ideas.
And it seems like it's that way across the board, not just in medicine or technology, but in history and archaeology and basically any area where new thought is possible.
And discouraged by those in power who want to stay in power and at the top of the heap.
It always makes me laugh because, you think scientists want to explore new things and they don't, they only want to explore their thing. Well, it's time for us to take a break. So when we come back, why don't we move on and talk a little bit about aviation and find out what's been going on there? Because, if man could fly, he would have